Hey everybody, I'm Hadas. I'm a web designer and an educator here at Elementor. And here with me it's Josh.
Hi guys, I'm Josh. I'm a web developer at Elementor
And today we're going to talk about the new release, the 2.5, and the custom position. You want to say a few words about it?
Custom positioning really gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of power. And like Peter Parker's uncle says, with great power comes great responsibility. And we're here to help you avoid making mistakes when you're using the new feature of custom positioning. And we're going to show you some tips and tricks and good best practice on how to use this new feature.
Okay, so let's dive in. Here I already made a design and you can see it here. We're going to build this together in Elementor.
Yeah, it's certainly a very beautiful design. And one thing you can notice is how would be pretty complicated to achieve this result using the conventional methods of laying out elements in Elementor using the grid. Like all those floating elements will probably be pretty tricky to place in all those positions. So that's why we got custom positioning to help us with these kinds of designs.
Okay.
All right, so let's start
let's
creating
start
this design.
Okay, so let's go back to the editor and let's start by placing the images, starting with the main image, the pink lady. Let's make it 80% because we don't need the whole width. And also add the triangle, make it full. Next will be the wavy. And last part will be the heading widget. Let's add some text here. Let's put a break here also. And give it some style because we can't work with the default text. Okay.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Okay, it is beautiful, but it's not.
It's not in the.
It's not in the right place, right? So this is where the absolute positioning comes in. I'd like to first point out that we're working with a section that has a single column. So all the elements are stacked one atop of the other.
The regular way.
Right, just like the normal way Elementor works. And now we're going to use absolute positioning to place those elements in the same space, overlapping one another. So we're going to show you how to do that.
Yeah. So let's start with the triangle. So
go to the advanced custom positioning section, and that's where we'll find the position setting, which we can now switch to absolute. So right away you can see how this element sort of floats above the other elements that are in the column. And that is because it's in absolute position, so it doesn't take up room in the column anymore. It doesn't take up any height in the column. You can see how the widgets that come after it have gone up. They're not distanced from the pink image. And the image we turned to absolute is floating over the pink image. And now we just need to make sure it's at the right size and it's at the right position. And that's what we're going to see now.
Okay, so how do I place it here?
So let's first start with talking about the size. So if you're familiar with the image widget, you'll know that the image widget has a width setting under style.
Right.
Right, so you might want to use this for setting the size of the image, but it might not be the best way to do it because when you're working with absolute widgets, you really get the chance to change the widget itself, the width of the widget itself, the size of the widget itself.
Okay.
So the best way to go about it, in my opinion, is to make the image full width, to take up the full width of the widget it's in.
Okay, so I'm gonna place 100%
Exactly.
here? Okay.
100% of the widget, and then resize the widget itself from outside, so to speak.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna change it here.
right. So using the width setting, we can use the custom width to adjust the image, the widget size, right? So the image inside the widget is 100% of the widget, and now we get to play with the widget size. So
Okay.
that's a more appropriate way to do things in absolute mode, in my opinion.
Okay, and I can see also there's a full width and inline. What's the difference between them?
Right, so full width is pretty straightforward, I think. In some cases, it might be useful to use full width in absolute mode as well. It depends on the circumstances. In our case, I don't think that's going to work for us.
Probably not.
And the inline option, I would use it more in the traditional way we use Elementor, inside the column, when we want to use a few elements one next to each other. So inline will help us make the size of the element, or the size of the widget, restricted to the size of the content that's in the widget.
Okay.
I wouldn't recommend using it in absolute mode because it might cause some issues when you drag the widget outside the column's boundaries. It might make it here. There you go. You just demonstrated it perfectly. It might cause
smaller.
It might cause changes to the size of your widget, so we don't want that. That's why we probably will use custom width in all cases.
Okay.
All right.
So let's change it back to custom.
Right.
And
So there are two ways of setting the custom width. One is by setting it using the slider. And the other one is by interacting directly with the widget by resizing it like we would do in Illustrator or other.
It's much easier.
Right.
It's more intuitive.
Right, it's much more intuitive.
Okay, I can see also there's a new unit here, the VW. What's the VW stands for?
Right, so we want the absolute positioned element to be as much as possible responsive friendly. Absolute elements have this tendency of not playing well in responsive, and they have this reputation of being bad for responsive, but that's only partially true. If you make sure to use what we call relative size units, we would usually end up with a much more responsive design. So percent, for example, is a relative unit. It will give us a certain fraction of the size of the column that the widget is in. So this way we can keep it flexible and sensitive to size changes in the browser. And VW is another relative size unit that is relative to the view width, meaning the browser size. So if you resize the browser, everything that is in VW will be affected by the change. So
I can make my design pixel perfect, sort of.
Sort of, yeah. You can allow it to maintain the proportions between different elements in the design and have it respond to changes in the width of your browser.
Okay.
So I think in this case it would be appropriate to use one of those relative sizes. I would use pixels really because
Pixels?
Sorry, not pixels.
Percentage.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would work for us in this case.
Let's make it like that. I think it's fine. And
Yeah, it
place
seems all right.
here.
I think before we start placing it, let's first make the other two elements absolute. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to advance, right? Custom position, and then change that to absolute, and it also go all the way to the top.
Right.
And same here. Gonna change it again. Okay. So
Okay.
everything is here at the top.
Right. Now we can set the width of those two other elements.
So
Maybe the text should be like 20% or something, or maybe 25. Let's see what
Okay.
works.
I think about 25.
Right.
And I'm gonna place it
Around here.
here.
Right.
And the wavy gonna be custom as well. And percentage. And let's say about that.
Yeah, that seems pretty accurate. Seems like
Okay.
it resembles the nice design you made for us.
And I can see there's also a lot of stuff going on underneath. The offsets. What are those means? The up, down, left, right. What's going on here?
Right. It might look a little confusing in the beginning, but let us explain how this works. So every element we place in our design, if it's absolute, we want to make sure that its distance from the edges is relative to the edges that it should be relative to. Let me demonstrate. For example, in this case, you place the heading all the way from the left. It's 800 something pixels from the left. Okay, so it might look okay in this case, but as soon as we start narrowing our viewport, we'll soon find out that our heading is now too far away from the left.
Yeah, everything starts vanishing.
And a similar thing happens with how far the things are from the top. The triangle went too far down because it's distanced from the top. So its reference point is the top end of our column. And that is the wrong reference point. What we really want for this heading, for example, is for it to be at zero distance from the right.
Yeah.
Right? So let's try that by changing the horizontal orientation to right and the vertical orientation to bottom. We can say this is 0 pixels from the right and maybe, I don't know, how much do you want it from the bottom?
Just a little bit more.
Just a little higher from the bottom?
About this high.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now let's try resizing our view again, and you can see right away how that affects the position. We still have some responsive font size to do and stuff like that, but generally speaking, this is a much better reference point for positioning it.
It's not gone.
Relative, right. So we might do the same thing with the triangle. Maybe we should also make it relative to the bottom, right?
And you want to stick with the pixels here, or it's better, or maybe change it to something else? I can see there's also
really, yeah.
VH here. What's the VH stand
VH
for?
is similarly to VW, which refers to the width of our viewport. VH is the height of our viewport. It might come into handy. It really depends on your design. I think in this case, pixels might work for us.
Okay.
In terms of distancing the element from the edges.
Okay, so going back to that triangle.
Right, let's apply the same principle.
Okay, so we're gonna place it left and bottom, right?
Seems right to me.
Okay, and just pull it up a little bit.
Just a little.
And
maybe even a little less, because we need to remember this is gonna remain the same distance when we go to mobile. So maybe what seems like not so far in the full view, it might be a lot in mobile, but really you can always, it's important to remember, you always have the option of setting different values for different breakpoints, like you know with other settings in Elementor that are mobile ready. But it's always good to have a good start and have the natural behavior of the design be as responsive as possible and leave us with the least fixes and changes for mobile.
okay, so here with the triangle, you're saying we're supposed to stay with the pixels or change it to something else?
Again, it really depends on
on
exactly
how it
the
goes.
result you want to achieve. And the most important thing, though, is to remember how these different settings affect your end result. So what you just did, for example, is you moved elements in the responsive mode, so you're basically getting a different position for the mobile view, right?
Okay. So let's move on to our next section.
Yep.
Let me show the design first. So here we have 3 columns with a rectangle behind them. So I'm just going to edit in the editor.
Okay.
I'm going to use the spacer widget.
Interesting. So you're going to use the spacer widget to create a rectangle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a creative use of Elementor widgets.
Thanks. Was something like that. Yeah, I think that's all right. So as we did it before, I'm going to go to custom position. I'm going to change the position to absolute, right?
Right.
And I can see it's already in the top, and I already gave a Z index to the picture, so the rectangle is behind it.
It's behind it, right. So Z index is going to help us control the order and the depth of each element in absolute positioning mode. So really the main difference in this case compared to the one we did before is the fact we have a multi-column setup here, whereas before we had just a single column. And the reason it matters is because the way columns act in responsive mode in Elementor is that they get stacked one above the other. So that really changes the way the elements are laid out on our page.
The breakpoints.
Right. So that happens usually, typically in the mobile view, we're going to get all the columns in a vertical order. So that's going to have an effect on our absolute elements as well, because they're relative to the column they're in. So the main thing to remember is we want to place our absolute elements inside the column that they're going to be relevant for. So this rectangle, for example, is kind of behind the middle image. So that's why it should be in the middle section. Even though in theory I could have placed the element in the left column and just drag it to the center of the design, that would not be a good idea if you take in consideration the breakpoint in mobile. Because then we're going to end up with an element that's outside
like
the viewport. Right. So exactly. So keeping in mind what is the relevant column is important.
Okay, so I need to realize first before I'm doing the absolute where everything's supposed to be after I'm changing the desktop view. Like if it's mobile, if it's tablet, what are my breakpoints?
Right. It's important to think about these things when you're constructing the layout.
Okay, so now I'm gonna change it so it will be wider. So I'm gonna use the width, right? Here I'm gonna use the custom or something else.
So really, you don't even need to manually switch the view setting from default to custom. By just dragging and resizing the element, you can already you can already start interacting with the width of this element.
That's cool.
We do, however, want to maybe change it to pixels in terms of the width. I'm sorry, percentage. Because
all right. Wait, now it's gone.
Okay, so we can always use the slider.
What's going on? What happened here?
Well, it might have not registered the size, but this is why you can always go directly to the width setting.
Okay, so I think that's about the size. Let's make it a little bit more, maybe 280. I think that's the number. Yeah, that's about it.
Seems right. I would, however, make the reference point bottom in this case because we really want it at a given distance from the bottom, if I'm understanding your design correctly. Am I right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm gonna stay with pixels, or should I change it to something else?
Again, this is
Depends.
really depending on how you want it to react to changes in the width. But as far as I'm concerned, pixels seems to be working just fine. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can see that it works pretty well in mobile. But really, the truth is there is a little bit of an issue, and that is the issue. When you have an absolute
Yeah.
element,
I have a scrolling here.
it can easily end up outside the viewport. So since this element is wider than the column it's in, it's necessarily going to be exceeding the boundaries of the column and therefore the document itself in mobile.
So I can just change the width, right?
Right. So technically, you could resize it for mobile and make sure that in mobile it doesn't do that. So that would be a good solution in some cases. Yeah, it could be a good solution for this case even. But if you have an element that you can't resize for any reason, it will not work well, you can use a different option. You can take advantage of the overflow hidden option we added to the section, which allows us to basically make sure that everything that exceeds the section will be cut off and not cause that horizontal scroll that we so much dislike in mobile design.
Okay, so it's just like a click of a button.
Right.
That's it. Yeah, we have the here we have overflow also.
Yeah, but that's probably going to get resolved by setting the typography.
Yeah. That's it like that. So yeah, now we don't have an overflow here.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. I think this section looks right.
Okay. So moving on to our last section here. Here we have this rectangle and we need to duplicate it so it will be the same. So I think that's an easy thing to do because we have the right click and we're just gonna duplicate it, but nothing happened.
Right, it might seem like nothing happened, but really the element did get duplicated. The reason why it's maybe a little hard to see it is because it has a position and the new element's position is exactly the same as the one, right? It's a copy of it, so they're basically one on top of the other. So as soon as you move it, you'll see that the old element will be revealed, and now we have a copy of our element. So you might run into this type of scenario, which is why we thought it was important to show it, right?
Yeah.
The first time it happened to me, I was like, what's going on? So if it happens to you guys, you know what to do.
Yeah, don't worry. So last thing we're going to show here is this arrow. I already placed an anchor here at the top, so the arrow is supposed to take us all the way to the top, but I want to put it in the right corner, so it will be about like here, and I want it to scroll all the way with us.
So you want it to stay there while we're scrolling,
yeah,
to remain in the same spot.
Exactly.
Right. So which is what fixed position is for.
Okay, so I'm going to advanced, right? And here at the custom positioning, I'm going to change the position to fix, right?
Right.
And now it's here.
Right. Now it's at the top of the document. So really, if you compare this to what we did before, it's pretty similar. The main difference is that instead of referring to the column, fixed elements are referring to the entire viewport.
Okay.
So our viewport is, so to speak, our column now.
So So we don't have like boundaries.
When we place elements at a certain distance from the top, left, and bottom, we're referring to the top, left, and bottom of our viewport rather than our column like we did before. So that's one difference, and the other difference is obviously the fact that it remains there while we're scrolling, which is why we call it fixed, because it's fixed in the same place in relation to our viewport. So now it's all the way at the top. We might want to adjust the width now and set it to be at the bottom using the offset.
Okay, so I'm going to change the width to custom, and the offset is going to be right and bottom.
That's right.
And I want to put it a bit inside, so it's going to be like
a little bit distanced from the bottom.
Yeah, about something like that, let's say. So now if I'm going to scroll, it's going to stay at the same spot, right?
That's right. It looks beautiful.
Yeah. See, I'm learning.
You're doing a great job. So this is pretty much it, right?
Yeah, so inclusion, do you have like a few rules for best practice or something that we need to pay attention every time we start working with custom position?
Yeah, so to sum it up, there are a few points that I think will help everyone working on absolute positioned elements and fixed position elements is things we talked about. I recommend using the widget width provided under custom positioning to resize images while making the image width inside the widget 100%.
Okay.
This makes it easier for us to control the size of images in a absolute position mode. The second thing is always keep in mind what the boundaries of your absolute design scene. So if you're working inside a column, you always want to remember where the edges of the column are and kind of try to orientate yourself wisely within that space.
Know your boundaries.
Right, know your boundaries, exactly. Know your boundaries, use, the last thing is use relative size units when appropriate, when it serves your purpose, because that really helps you create designs that are much more flexible and much more responsive ready.
And it makes our life easier.
Certainly, it makes our life easier. It helps us maintain the relationship between different elements in your design in the right proportion. So, very important. And so, yeah, image size. You know your boundaries, know what's your reference point, what's the right reference point, whether it is right, left, top, bottom, and use the responsive, the units. Relative units, right?
Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you'll join us for our next webinars and tutorials. That's it for now.
Yeah, see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.